All right. There we go. Good morning, everybody. Let's do this. All right. So you want to start a podcast. That's why we're here this morning. And we have a very special guest with us, Jake Blanchard from Delta Perspective LLC. He's also the host of the Jake Blanchard Podcast. Jake comes to us by way of Idaho today. So it is nice and early that we get to kick off his day, hopefully in a really good way. But very excited to cover the content today. But before we do that, I want to share a little bit about who we are as a Tech SIG. So if you're a first-time technology special interest group attendee today, put that in the chat, say hello, introduce yourself. We are very excited to have you if this is your first time. So pop into the chat, introduce yourself, say hello. But we meet the first Friday of every single month. Most months, the first Friday. Sometimes we'll change that up, but all of our events are available on the ATD Central Iowa website on the event calendar. But we're dedicated 100% to technology. So how do we use technology in learning? How do we use technology in talent development? And the rest of our year we have planned out. We have some really cool events happening October 1st, November 5th, and then December 3rd will be the final one of 2021. And that event, we've got something kind of cooking up right now, but we're working out the final details. So that event is TBD. We'll let you know how that goes. But October 1st, our next event we have coming up is going to feature Megan Torrance from Torrance Learning. So if you've been at DevLearn or attended any national events, she is just a fabulous, fabulous person who agreed to share and volunteer her time with us today. And she's in October, and she's going to talk about getting agile. So how to use an agile approach in talent development or learning programs. November 5th, we're bringing our 2021 technology show and tell. So last year we did a couple of these, but this is where we will solicit projects or solicit ideas from people to come together and share what we're working on. What's something that we're really proud of, a project we've done, maybe something you've used, a new technique in e-learning, or you've created a video that you're really proud of. We'll be soliciting ideas to kind of showcase some of those in our technology show and tell. And then our final event of the year will be December 3rd. And again, TBD. I'm just going to leave you wanting more with what that event is, but I guarantee you it is going to be absolutely fabulous. Coming up September 20th or 17th, that is 2 weeks from today, we have Pivot, our Professional Development Day 2021. I believe there's still some spots open to register. If you have not yet, there is an amazing breakout session slate happening, and we also have 2 fabulous keynotes lined up. We have information about that at atdiowa.org. If you're interested in that, you can register there as well. We also have Amy Boyce and Nikki Schmidt. If you have questions, you can see their email address down there as well. Feel free to reach out to them. But very, very exciting. As long as things don't go absolutely bonkers over the next 2 weeks, the plan is still to have that event in person. But stay tuned in case anything changes based on kind of what's happening with COVID in the area as we get closer. Finally, a little bit about ATD. These technology special interest group meetings are free for members and non-members, but we always encourage people to sign up for a local membership with ATD Central Iowa. We are a local chapter of the ATD, Association for Talent Development National Organization. We have tons of really great programming, a lot of it free, like our technology special interest groups. We also have a leadership special interest group that meets on the 3rd Friday of every month. That's also a fabulous opportunity to get connected with people and talk about topics in leadership. We've got a fabulous network of local resources, local folks that are always willing to share their expertise. That's one of my favorite things about ATD Central Iowa and why I participate and co-lead the Tech SIG. I love connecting with people. And then we also have a discounted power membership. So a power membership is that national membership within ATD. And there are amazing. I think ATD's national membership gives you access to a library of resources that's unparalleled. You've also got educational programs and discounted rates to national organizations. So if you have not signed up to be a local ATD Central Iowa chapter member or a national power member, I would highly encourage you to do so. So with that, let's bring in our very own Jake Blanchard. And this is very exciting. So Jake, a little bit about Jake. Jake comes to us by way, like I mentioned, of Idaho here this morning. He's a business consultant and high-powered performance mindset coach, and which you'll undoubtedly see here this morning, is determined to live his best life and share his passion with others. His firm Delta Perspective LLC services clients nationally in the areas of strategic planning, program management, and process improvement. And his clients include organizations ranging from startups to that's billion with a B, billion-dollar firms. He's the host of the aptly named the Jake Blanchard Podcast, and also produces a web series on YouTube called Out Jakes that features local businesses. Jake comes to us by way of Idaho, where he lives with his wife and 2 kids. And we wouldn't have had the opportunity to connect with Jake here this morning had it not been for our very close friend of the Tech SIG, our very own Aaron Gibson. So big shout out to Aaron for helping us get the ball rolling here this morning and helping us connect with Jake. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jake. I will be monitoring the chat here this morning. So if you have any questions for Jake as we get going, feel free to throw those into the chat. I'll make sure we get those covered, get those answered, and then we'll go from there. I am recording this meeting, so again, I'll follow up after this is done to let you know when it's ready. So with that, Jake, the floor is yours. Welcome. Happy to have you this morning.
Hey, thanks, Adam. Want to verify real quick. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. And then in that same vein, I just wanted to, so good to see you again, Aaron. And then for all of you to know, for me, the latter part of my college years and the early part of a career professional, Aaron had just such an impact, I think, from a person who is willing to give her time and effort. So I just want to recognize you for that, Aaron. I know we haven't talked in about 10 years, but how great it is to see you. All right. So you want to start a podcast. What a fun and interesting topic to talk through. Just kind of setting the table here. One, thanks for having me. This is a great opportunity for me to talk a little bit about my journey in developing a podcast and some of the things that I've been doing over the last couple of years. The thing that I'm going to warn you about, one, is that I'm a terrible employee. That's why I'm a consultant. I realized that very early on in my career, that I'm very interested in working with organizations for short periods of time and then getting well out of their way before anything operationalizes long term. So knowing that about myself, I found myself, on and off again. And I'll talk a little bit about my career path prior to podcasting. Also, I do recognize how critical, though I'm not the best employee, how critical the area that you work in is for an organization. And what I mean by that is I've taken a lot of trainings. I've had the opportunities to log into these portals, and they've just gotten better and better and better over the years. The types of content that's there, the more dynamic, the content's a lot more dynamic than it used to be, where you would just kind of sit down and click through as fast as possible. And then, okay, now I've complied and I'm moving on. There's really some robust resources that are available for folks. So it's cool to be speaking with people who are interested in, helping people with different learning styles, different abilities, raise the water level for organizations as a whole. The thing that we are all competing for, regardless if you're the Jake Blanchard Podcast or regardless if you're training and development within your organization, is attention. And I think that that's really the underpinning of what we try to get at with talking about podcasts as a potential vehicle for talent development or training or learning within your organization, is that, we are bombarded daily as individuals, you as well as the employees that work in the organizations you represent, with hundreds and thousands of inputs on a regular basis of things that could potentially take your attention and time, whether that be a cat video or follow, subscribe to the Jake Blanchard Podcast. So I see a couple smiling faces. Anyway, the goals today, I'm going to give you, I'm not going to make this boring. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I speak to my journey. I'm going to reflect on your world a little bit, and then maybe build a scaffolding here or a bridge, if you will, that you might be able to cross within your organization if you are to set up a podcast. And then this picture of me is the day before I launched my podcast about a year and a week ago, year and 2 weeks ago. My wife ended up taking that while I was, overthinking absolutely everything. And so I'd been in my office for almost 4 hours, sound checking and trying to figure it out. And I don't know, she snapped a very candid photo of me, which is the first time I get to share it. So Let me tell you a little bit about myself as well. Again, I told you I'm a career consultant. Let me tell you how that came about. I was in 2008, I had a scholarship through a semiconductor manufacturer here in Idaho that came with an internship. I was so excited to do that internship in 2008. Kind of the bottom fell out for the housing industry and some other things. I had no longer an internship in that organization because they laid several thousand people off. So I was scrambling my junior year in college to find an internship. I just had happened to sit into a lessons from the alumni style session from an HR director at a health system. And he said something about internships at hospitals. And I never really thought about working in healthcare long-term. And I walked over and I said, hey, do you have supply chain at a hospital? Which I was studying supply chain at the time. And he's like, yeah, of course we do. So he put me in contact with the director. And they didn't have a paid internship. They had an unpaid internship. And I said, well, I'll take an unpaid internship. That sounds great. So it was a 160-hour internship, and which is, if you're doing the math, it's 4 weeks, 40 hours a week, 160 hours. What I realized was the person who brought me in for the internship was working in one building, and I was working in another building, and nobody really knew the terms of my internship. And I didn't have anything to do over the summer because my wife had just graduated and she was making a little money. And I was like, well, I might as well just keep showing up to work for as long as this badge will work, which it was set up for like 6 months. So I showed up to work, and they hate when I tell this story, by the way. The health systems asked me to stop telling it. But I showed up to work every day. You know, I went to Ross Dress for Less, got myself some slacks and a shirt, and just showed up for 6 months unpaid during the summer and the senior year of college. And then toward the back end of that, what makes the story relevant is I was getting ready to leave, and I'd been adding a ton of value to the organization, rewriting standard operating procedures manuals for their ERP system, doing a bunch of supply chain analysis on orthopedics, redoing their returns process. I just made an impact within the organization. And finals week was coming up. I needed to focus on school. I was kind of done with not getting paid. So I turned in my resignation and they're like, well, you can't leave. And I'm like, you don't even pay me. And then they realized the whole thing that had happened. They said, listen, we don't have an FTE position, but we really like you. And we have a discretionary consulting budget that we're not using right now. We want to bring you on. They hired me as an external contractor. I started my career as a contracted supply chain analyst for almost 18 months. So they paid me month to month, just as long as I could prove my value. And when that imprinting happens to you early in your career, like, it's kind of a fun way of working, right? So I'm external to the organization. I'm a little bit different than the other employees, at least in my eyes. And I got to work on so many compelling, interesting things. So that's why I'm a consultant. And I figured I'd share that just to make the story a little bit more interesting. But again, focused on supply chain education, bolted on project management, process improvement skill sets over the years, own a consulting firm. High performance coach, as Adam said earlier, podcast or web series. I do some guest speaking like this. And then finally, I'm a father. I do wake surfing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, and I've been known to slap a bass guitar every now and then in various bands. That picture over here on the right, I took last week in Maine. If you don't know who the guy is in the red, he is I don't know if he's a real martial artist or not. His name's Master Ken. He has like this viral following online of these hilarious videos that he does. But I was at a jiu-jitsu seminar that was put on by a Navy SEAL named Jocko Willenick in Maine for a week. And Master Ken kind of showed up out of the blue. And I figured, you could see my cat stance there and think I'm cool. So moving on. So all that to say, I had a lot of things going on, fairly successful consulting firm. I'd been, prior to COVID, I had spent about a third of a score on an airplane. If you don't know what a score is 20 years. It's like 6 or 7 years. I don't know. It's a fun way to say it. But anyway, I was traveling every single week, and I was really that person that would talk to you on an airplane. That's what I would do. If we sat next to each other, I was going to find out about you. I was going to find out about your daughter, your granddaughter, your grandpa, like whatever's interesting about you, mostly because I'd spend all day working or being in a hotel. And now I was flying home and I just needed some human interaction in some way, shape, or form. So if any of you are on this call and recognize my face from an airplane seat, I'm sorry. Like I have a lot of questions. About a year into COVID and working from home, I realized that I was starving for new perspectives and conversations. And there's a really interesting intersection of people's perspectives that come through your life. Hey, son, I'm on a call. Sorry, I have an 8-year-old. My wife's not here this morning. So a really interesting intersection of people's perspectives coming into my life. So people recommend books. People would recommend things that they did to get over a fear or whatever it was. It was really interesting and compelling to me. And I was seeking that out. At the time, I was going through some personal branding because I was doing some performance mindset coaching, some of the color schemes, the gold and the black and some of the cursive on my name. I was going through that to set up a personal page, jakeblanchard.com. And at the same time, I said, well, why not just start a podcast too and just talk to people? What that started was a lot of questions. This is maybe, 1/100th of the questions that you end up asking yourself when you're trying to put a podcast together. Like, who's my audience? Why will they listen? What's my format? Who cares what I have to say? Like all the hypothetical questions and then the self-doubt questions that come along with it. How do I prep for this? How do I do social media? What is an RSS feed? I had so much to learn around it. And I spent about 4 to 6 weeks just spinning on these topics. And I became kind of emotionally limbic around starting a podcast. I'm like, why am I having such a hard time starting this? Like, it's just a conversation with people. And when I had that realization, I texted 5 friends. 2 said yes. I set up a Zoom call and I pressed record. I stopped worrying about it. I said, this is for the act of podcasting. This is like, who cares what this is going to be? It will mature as I gain perspective. I don't have perspective today. That's why this is so hard. So why don't I see what podcasting is like, and then I can decide what I like about it. So then that's exactly what I did. Eventually the thesis evolved through the podcast. So, I tried to be very positive, motivating, inspiring, and interesting. I try to have my guests that come on represent those ideas and values as well. I'm not going to bring anyone on who's kind of just mad at the world for whatever reason. And I actually stay away mostly from politics as well, just because we got enough of that going on right now, at least in my perspective. I try to keep my guest list fairly diverse and kind of sporadic. And then I focus on business and sports, areas of business and sports that I'm interested in, but it's not excluded to it. I'd have anybody on. Music, niche things. Like anytime that I scratch the surface on something of like that I don't know anything about, like kayaking or bocce ball, like I'll run into somebody that does it. I'm like, all right, you got to come on the podcast and tell me about this thing. I learned a lot about like mineral-based sunscreen and nature photography and just things that I never thought that I'd really be learning about. And then also, there's the things that you start to operationalize as part of this process, which is, the time frame in which I will speak, 45 to 60 minutes, how often I'll do it, and then how I prep. And what I realized was early on in this process, I used to try to think of every question that I could ask, and the questions would become very inauthentic to a conversation. So it would almost be like, if you are planning to ask a question, it doesn't matter what the other person is going to say. And then you just kind of ask your next question. It becomes a lot of non sequiturs, right? So what I needed to do was research a whole lot about the topic that's coming on, and then have 5 or 6, maybe 7 guiding questions that respect a conversation arc. And then I say, okay, like these questions will show up somewhere in here, but they'll guide me to it. And so that was kind of the maturation process that I went through. So that's how I prep. And then, every 2 weeks I reach out to about 20 people. And I segment those folks based on kind of like following or interest into like A, B, and C categories. That's no reflection of like kind of the dynamite person that they are inside. But as far as people that have, 1 million plus followers on social media versus people who don't, versus people who maybe this is their first time that they're podcasting, I have all those people on. I mean, I've had several people. It's like, this is the first time I've ever been interviewed. And I'm like, great. Like, I'm still pretty new at this too. Like, let's have some fun. Because it's really the gold is in the conversation. And the thing that they don't know that they're going to say that they eventually say. That gives them perspective about their life, or gives me perspective about something new. And then also I found Chance. This is a picture of Chance. I hope Chance listens to this. He's a sweet young man. Chance was like doing nothing really during COVID. I know his dad, he's my Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor. And I reached out to Chance because I knew he had a background in film and video editing and some of those types of things. And he had just gotten laid off. And I said, hey man, like, do you want to like run a podcast for me and do all the things that I really don't want to do, like thumbnails and, respect all the branding that I had developed for my personal brand, and run my social media page and make cool promo videos and all that stuff. I'll pay you. And he goes, I would like to do that a lot. And I said, okay, great. So for the last year, Chance and I have talked 2 or 3 times a week, and we've got our systems down, and Chance allows me to stay in my quote unquote zone of genius, which is really important for me because I have other stuff going on. So I get to schedule who I want to schedule, talk to who I want to talk to, load it to a Google Drive. And then Chance actually does everything else besides posting. I'll post the podcast, but he runs all the social on the other side of it. So the results here, I'm still small when the world's a podcast. Like I get an opportunity to talk to like big time podcasters, or like, yeah, I'm doing $250,000 a month downloads, or $1 million a month downloads. And you're like, holy smokes, like how do you get there? But with time, right, and consistency. So I'm about 70 plus episodes in. I do well over 1,000 downloads or listens on a monthly basis, represented in 20 plus countries. I picked up 2 sponsors along the way. Code JBP at checkout for these fine brands. But Stream to See makes mineral-based sunscreen and personal care products. They're #1 mineral-based sunscreen in Rolling Stone magazine. And then Fellowship Brand makes beard oil. And I have a beard and I have tattoos, and they make tattoo balm as well. So why not? And then also, when you host people on the podcast that have maybe a name, or they have another organization managing their brand, that company, they listen to your podcast and they really like the way that you interviewed, they'll reach out to you and say, hey, I've got other guests. I've got people of influence. I've got things that can I send them your way? You choose if you want them. Like, there's no commitment. If you want to talk to them, you can talk to them. Let me just kind of open up that gateway of discussion. And I say, of course. So I actually have 2 brand management firms that send people to me all the time. They say, hey, do you want, and a lot of times I say no, but sometimes I'm like, yeah, absolutely. That sounds awesome. So I've been doing it a little over a year. The thing that I really set out to do is keep my podcast separate from my business. I really don't want to talk about consulting or high performance coaching, though it's an inspiring motivational podcast, though I do kind of give a nudge to conversations I've had or points of reference that I have. I don't try to sell myself or my business on it. I really just am trying to highlight the things that are interesting about an individual. And so I've really sharpened the point down to that. So this kind of, and then on the right-hand side here's some of the guests that I've had on. If you don't know some of these folks, look them up. I mean, they're very interesting. A lot of them are just such interesting people, specifically folks like Ray Kashkar, who's Navy SEAL and multiple shows on the History Channel. Larry Hagner has the #1 podcast and resources for dads in the world called The Dad Edge. Lawrence Krauss is one of the top astrophysicists in the world. He's been on Rogan's podcast multiple times. Same with Daniele Bellelli. He's been on Rogan's podcast multiple times. Tony Blauer is, I'm actually posting that one today. He has arguably some of the most influence on self-defense in the military SWAT teams since the 1980s. He's kind of like redefined the way that people do close quarter combat in the military. So really, and, black and white tattoo artists and, people who are big in Bitcoin. So, lots of diverse guests here. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to. Some statistics here. As you saw probably in the breakout sessions, like, you're all listening, consuming, or around people that are consuming or listening to podcasts on a regular basis. Like, this is not a fringe trend. This has become past the tipping point. We are in the consumption of this as a steady form of entertainment or media or education. And the trend continues to grow, not just people who have ever interacted with podcasts, but people who are regularly kind of weaving them into the fabric of their lives. And, there's so many kind of stats like this, that it's projected to continue to grow. You know, the niches are infinite. The people who are willing to talk about the things that they're doing is infinite, which makes it even more difficult, to the point I made earlier in this discussion, which is we're all competing for attention and time and attention. So just, you know, some additional places where folks consume podcasts: mostly home, transit, work, others like the gym. And then also there's this thing that happened in, you know, you can kind of see it starting in 2014, but really happening in 2016 through 2017, was the advancements in smartphones. You know, it's primarily where everyone gets their podcasts these days, right? You're listening to it on your phone because your phone's with you at all of these locations here on the left hand side.
Jake, we had a question come into the chat real quick about how, do you see any stats go up or down during COVID, you know, as far as downloads or number of listeners? Do you see any impact, you know, during the, you know, kind of that year of the heart of the pandemic here?
You know, I wish I could speak to that around my podcast. I started in the middle of COVID with my podcast a little over a year ago. So I didn't really have a base point ahead of it. But folks that I've talked to have just had record smashing years for themselves, especially ones that have a little reach in their podcasts. And I think everyone kind of being inside or working from home, it's so easy to just turn it on, right? Just turn it on in the background, turn it on while you're cleaning the house, making dinner, or whatever it is. So yeah, no stats specifically around my podcast. So then I, as I was preparing for this, I thought about how this applies to training and development. So this is maybe kind of the meat on the bones as far as the conversation goes, but something to think about here. In training, training is typically following a plan. Now, by the way, I am no training and development professional, right? So please, if you're locked and loaded and you're ready to fire, like, just be kind. But my understanding is that training is typically following a plan. A lot of times organizational training that I've experienced, time is precious, right? You don't want to waste folks' time when they're training. So like, you want to have a really polished end product that's going out to the individual that they're consuming. It also gives you credit or kind of validates what's going on, that it's important and it's polished. Webinars also tend to be static, a moment in time. So even this being recorded, we're not building on this conversation at all. Likely we're not going to. This is a moment in time. The word compliance is often used. The second that you use the word compliance, you're really kind of poking a hole in that boat of entertainment and leaking out or sinking it, just because compliance sounds, I don't know, it's pretty heavy, especially to folks like me. And then though it's become more entertaining, interactive and fun, it's still training. And it's all in the mindset of the employee or the person who's ingesting the training at the point in which they're ingesting it. So if you're at work and you're being told to do something, it might be entertaining. It might be better than something that's not, but it's still training. And you're like, maybe engaged, maybe not. I interacted with, and you probably all know this company with Ninjago, something like that. Ninjago. I watched a training the other day on like network security safety, and there's like this whole storyline, this whole like mom and daughter thing, and there's like this graphics and all this other stuff, and it was way better than trainings have been in the past. But at the end, I'm like, man, that was a lot for like 2 sentences that you could have told me to just not click on the link. Like, just tell me not to click on the link and I won't. But, Sandra and her grandmother had this whole conversation about passwords and a cookie jar. And like, I don't know. On the other side of it, when we look at podcasts, podcasts have the ability, through the expectation of the person consuming the channel, to be informal or very formal, right? Sometimes folks get on and they just start having a conversation and it's just riffing and streams of consciousness. And then sometimes it follows a very like mature, rigid arc of conversation. Oftentimes podcasts that are polished or put out there are not polished. They're fairly raw. I mean, some folks will take the time to go through and edit the little snippets and the blurbs, but there really is diminishing returns in post-production when it comes to podcasts. And in fact, there are certain studies out there that say that people kind of desire the authentic aspects of those types of conversations. they also give us the opportunity to build on ideas for longer periods of time. So inside jokes are big on certain podcasts. There's one podcast. Now, if you're into like, I don't want to say dirty humor, but if you're into like humor that's a little fringe, there's a podcast called Your Mom's House. There's Tom Segura is a comedian, his wife, Christina Pedinsky. They have one, it's parental advisory. I'm just giving you the warning if you go in that direction. But the really interesting thing about their podcast is they have all these inside jokes, like, and their viewers and their listeners are all about it. They sell merchandise around it. Like, and there's just like things that as an outsider you look at and like, what are you talking about? Why do you keep saying jeans? But like, that's the conversation that they built over time. And that's kind of the power of podcasts. When you build a listener base, is that you get to have that conversation kind of with them. And then generally podcasts are also associated with entertainment today still. I mean, education, those types of things. But, you know, we saw where podcasts are being consumed on a previous slide. It's not all at work. It's mostly at home or at the gym or in transit. So it fits into that entertainment bucket. One thing that's specific to training development organizations, though, is what a cool idea to tell your employees stories. I was kind of grappling with this because it's one of those things that you're taking on a little bit of risk in having some of these conversations. But I mean, ultimately, it's not a live stream. Like, you control the final publishing as an organization, right? So you can kind of decide what product gets out to your organization. But storytelling through podcasts is so critical, and it's such an important part of what the medium provides that maybe other mediums like webinars, for instance, don't lend themselves well to, because it is truly a conversation, and it does put you kind of in the seat of that individual and allows you to hear it raw in their words. So just a thought there. Any questions so far?
We had, some questions come in that you might get to these here in a second, but I'll just throw them out there now, and then you can tell us whether you're going to get to them. So the first one was advice for someone wanting to start a podcast, what equipment you need to use, platforms, how to house it, where you begin. So lots of questions packaged into that one, but really relating to like, if I want to start it, what do I do? And then what equipment might I use?
That'll be on the next slide right after this one.
I figured that was the case. Do you know, I've got a small question for you here. Personally, this didn't come in the chat, but do you have a sweet spot or any recommendation for time wise? I know your podcasts run around, you said an hour.
45 minutes to an hour.
Do you have any statistics, or do you see anything personally as far as like what percentage of the audience engages the entire time, or when we start to tune out, like what the attention span and appetite looks like?
Yeah. On YouTube, especially in kind of my early days, for the ones that were posted up there, the average is two minutes. Like, and that's actually decent. Like from the standpoint of like how long people hang with you, that's an average, right? So you'll have one person watch it all the way through, and then you'll have 6 people just kind of click in for a couple minutes each. And then, it'll move your average way down. I don't know if they're interested, they'll listen for however long of a duration that you put out there. I don't typically like personally listening to podcasts that are less than 15 minutes. I don't feel like you can scratch the surface of anything. I think it's always just kind of orientation to a topic, unless they just go like right in, like really deep on this, like really nuanced thing. Like one aspect of meditating, like, okay, now I know about this thing. Okay, great. Sure. And then moving on. But it's hard to have a conversation in 15 minutes for sure. I'd say at least an hour.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. I had another question come in from Julie. What exactly is an RSS feed? You mentioned that earlier.
Oh, I'll touch on that in a minute.
Okay, perfect.
As well.
All right. So and then final question. Sorry, that came in. One more. Sorry to interrupt you here. How you reach new audiences? And that might be another thing that you might hit on too, but like, how do you reach those folks?
I just love when the validity of my next slide just gets lit up, right? So all of that and more, just after a couple points here.
Okay, perfect.
So as I continue to build a bridge, or that scaffolding I talked about a little bit more, I just wanted to kind of put some ideas out there. around what you might do within your organization, specifically around your organizational lens. I know some people are thinking about creating podcasts personally. And this kind of applies as well, especially some of those other questions. I know what I tell you, if you were doing it personally, do the same thing I did. Just find people that you want to talk to, find the topic you want to talk about, hit Zoom, record. Like, what's the worst that can happen? You have a recorded conversation you never publish. Like, you just get to learn so much about yourself so quickly. In that, you get to troubleshoot your audio issues. It's like go to training camp and then go to the preseason and then go have your season, as opposed to just putting a lot of pressure on a launch for something that you've never done. So when I think about organizations and maybe what's missing in organizations around things like podcasts, it'd be very cool to see organizations segment topics in sales or ops or finance, and to discuss critical parts of the business or organizational transformation that's happening, or pull forward aspects of what's important to their clients and important to their customers, and stories from people who are actually using the thing that they produce, and how it's changed their life. Diversity, equity, and inclusion are topics that are extremely relevant as well, and need to be expressed through these mediums in a great way to have those conversations as well. Even talking about trainings that were designed and taken, so I think about like a podcast, like, why couldn't you talk about a training that somebody took, that they learned something and applied in the field, and then they did something meaningful for the business, whether that increased their variable comp, whether that satisfied a client that wasn't satisfied, whatever it was. And then, current state of the market, those types of things. I mean, typically we do those things as a webinar, but how interesting might it be if you had a regular host and we're building on conversations with those individuals in a way that wasn't, and I sit in these, I've got a client right now who does these town halls monthly. And I'm in a lot of these meetings with the executive leadership where we go plan the script for the town hall. And then it's like, they talk about the thing and they're like, okay, and now to you, Kevin. And then Kevin's like, all right, let me tell you about what happened in ops and blah, 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 blah. And it's like, it's definitely an acceptable way to disseminate information, but is it natural? Is it entertaining? Is it connecting with you? Probably not. And maybe a podcast opens up a door as well. I think there's some challenges associated with doing podcasts in corporate situations or organizations as well. Providing the right level of information is one. There's a lot of stuff that happens in a company, a lot of information that people are privy to that may not be industry knowledge. And maybe we don't want to get that out there. Like, what if our competitors listen? What if I say something wrong and offend somebody in a department or et cetera? And then also, is it valuable? How do you know people are actually going to listen to this thing? Like, okay, I spun up a podcast for Dunder Mifflin. Like, does people really want to hear about paper while they're ironing their shirts to go to work? Like, or are they diehard employees in that way? Like, what are we doing here? And then finally, like, if we're spending time developing this podcast, are we tying up valuable resources in the organization that could be doing other things? And I think those are all reasonable questions to be asking, especially when we talk about the size of an organization that might be doing this. So finally, here's that slide here that answers a few of these questions. The first thing is, like, who's the host? Like, for me, it was easy. I'm the host. And for many of you that might be developing a personal podcast, you're the host. All right, you solve that problem. But from an organizational standpoint, does the host have to be an employee? In fact, isn't it better for the host to be an external contractor? And in my perspective, it might be. Because employees leave for other organizations, and typically external contractors are coin operated. So having somebody host your podcast as an external point of view might be a great way of making it interesting or fun or dynamic. And it's also, that person doesn't know the things that are going on day to day in your company. So that internal dialogue, or that risk of maybe saying something that you don't want to get out there, maybe that's mitigated through that. When it comes to equipment, I have kind of a funny setup. I'll tell you my setup. I have a light here so you can see my face. I've got a Blue Yeti microphone. This was a lot of people that I talked to said, go get a Blue Yeti. Like it's the best for like the price point and all this stuff. So that's what I went out and did. You can spend as much money as you want to on microphones. I've looked into microphones, man, there's some really nice microphones out there. You can get into the thousands and thousands of dollars. For me, the audio quality has been pretty good with this thing. So I like it. I wanted to do something different with my background for kind of the video, so you can see, and actually my monitor's turned a little bit, so it looks like my house wasn't constructed correctly. But I have a GoPro that sits on top of my monitor, and I run it through a 4K inverter, and then I hook all my audio up to it and run it back into my computer. And that works for me to kind of get this fisheye view, so I can kind of use my hands when I talk. But it's really up to you if you're going to add video to that production. Also, things get a little different when you're, let me stop there. When it comes to recording software, I told you I use Zoom, and I may change that. I've got a quarterly review coming up at the end, or a yearly review, coming up at the end of the year, to look at the technology that I use, to look at the way that I'm doing things, to really challenge myself in evolving this, whether it be hardware, whether it be software, whether it be format, or the way I present the podcast. But I'm really holding off on deep diving into all those different areas. But I hear people are very excited about Riverside FM or Restream. Those are two really popular software packages that allow you to record podcasts and then do really cool stuff, like add in intros and sound effects and some of the things that people want to do. I think where this all becomes challenging is when you do live and in-person podcasts. I've had some experience doing a couple of my podcasts live. So I've set up a studio in a couple different organizations to have the podcast. And I also flew to California to interview one of my guests in his personal studio. The cameras, the editing, the sound checks, the mixer boards, the production that is associated with that is typically a higher quality. And again, diminishing returns. Like if my audience was at 1 million downloads a month, I would probably lean on that quality element. For right now, I'm learning how to have these conversations, and I've grown quite a bit, but I still have a lot more to grow before I start really investing in what it takes to put that production level together. One of the things that I thought would be, so RSS feeds. Let's talk about that for a minute. So RSS, if you're not familiar with the term, it comes out of the technology framework of XML. And really, all RSS means is really simple syndication. That's literally what RSS means, really simple syndication. And so when you record an audio file for a podcast, you'll have someone like Zencastr or Buzzsprouts or Bluehost. They'll host your RSS feed, which means that they'll basically give you a link or a home to copy to load your audio file to, and then it will distribute out across the internet. So when I upload a podcast, I don't go to Spotify and upload it, then Apple Podcasts, then upload it, then Podbean, then Stitcher. Like I don't upload it in all these different sites. I upload it to Zencastr, and then they distribute my RSS feed. And that's, and that really demystifies how you get distribution, because like when you pay whatever it is, the $40, $50, $100 a month for the different companies that do that, like they'll get you everywhere. All you have to do to get on Apple Podcasts and have decent graphics. They're like, do you have a good thumbnail? Do you have a good graphic? Yes. Okay, then you can be in our store. And I don't know who decides that. If there's just kind of like a guy who's like, yes, 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 no, yes. Like, I don't know how they figure that out. But they said yes to me. So I was like, all right, that's good enough for who it's for. So you see this site here, Castos. So when we talk about corporate training or private links or membership-based links, Castos is like the number one name in that, from what I can tell. I've run into one person who uses it for a private podcast that they do for their fitness clients. So this particular person has a ton of private coaching and group coaching fitness clients. He publishes a podcast out on the internet, and then he also has a separate one that talks specifically about his program and the goals and the results. And then it has people in his membership on, and you pay a fee, a subscription fee, to go listen to that, or you're one of his members. If you're a member, you get access to it. If you want to hear those member conversations or not a member, you go through a paywall. And so Castos might be a great application for some of these like corporations where you just want people in your organization to log in. And then also you can see everyone who's listened. Like it's got a lot more analytics on that side of it too, from what I understand. What I also suggest is that you bolt on a governance structure to podcasting, whether you're doing it personally or whether you're doing it through your organization. Having time strategically to sit down and plan monthly and know what you're doing and know what you've done, and looking at your failure points, thinking quarterly about the bigger changes that you want to happen or how you progress. And then, I said weekly recordings. I like weekly. I know people who do it daily. I do a podcast a day. That is a lot. And so week is kind of that cadence that if you're just getting started, it'll force you to be disciplined. It'll force you to think about it. It won't feel overwhelming though, especially when you get in the habit of uploading your RSS feed and you're like, oh, that's all it was. Hit record, audio file, dump it and do the thing. I feel good now. I was thinking about this from a corporate standpoint too. Like what I do with our podcasts or my podcasts is, out of that hour-long conversation, I pay Chance to listen to the podcast, and I give Chance free for all. Like I don't micromanage him at all. I don't tell him, unless there's a part of the conversation I really want to highlight, I say, hey, listen to this as an outsider. You tell me what the most interesting part of the conversation was. Clip that out, put it on social media. That's the direction. And so Chance goes out, he listens to it, he pulls 2 or 3 things out, and he reposts that on social media. And I think that's really important when you're thinking about who's really going to listen within your organization. Is like, not everybody's going to sit down and listen to that 60 minutes, but if you got 2 minutes of gold, you got 3 minutes of gold, and you can just put a clip together and addend it to a newsletter or just distribute it out through an email chain, man, I think you get a little more sticky, you add a little more credibility to your podcast within your organization. Branding's important, but I think you all know that. I mean, you're probably diehard branding experts and how that shows up in the content that you put out. But, that was newer to me, like really realizing how consistent I needed to be to establish that credibility with my audience. We talked about it earlier, polls and questions, and God, what a unique opportunity you have as an organization to have access to people to ask them what they want to know. Like when I've tried to poll my friends or people who follow me on social media. I don't get I don't know, maybe it's my friend group, but I don't get the smartest responses from people. Like they're really just trying to be funny or joking, or they don't like take it seriously. So I'll be like, hey, what do you want to hear about this? And, I'll get 20 comments about how my, nose is big, or, hey, Jake, shut up, like those kinds of things. So, I don't know, within an organization, maybe your Slack channels, maybe your other forms of communication that you have would be a really great way to solicit some of that feedback. And, maybe your company ends up writing the podcast for you. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, you can probably ask enough questions to really have rich, dynamic conversations all the time around it. And then being consistent. I mean, that's the number one thing. When we talked about, have you seen numbers go up or drop off? The only time I see numbers drop off is when I take time off personally, and I don't preload all my podcasts in so that I miss a Monday or a Tuesday. Or like I went 10 days without posting a podcast. The next time I posted a podcast, I kind of felt like the world was being like passive aggressive with me. Like, oh, okay. Oh, you're back now. Yeah. Well, maybe not today. Because my listenership, I had to almost rebuild it, which is kind of crazy to think about. So a couple more tips here, and then we kind of get into and how are we doing on time?
We have about 11 minutes.
Perfect.
Remaining.
I'll hit the gas pedal on these, and then I'll take any questions or thoughts here. But I approach my prep with kind of the 2 times rule. So if I plan on having an hour-long conversation, which is typically, if I have an hour-long conversation, I'm going to prep for 2 hours. And again, most of that is just researching the topic that person's done, or like reading through their book, or, the thing is, I got a bookshelf back here. To be honest, I've had about 20 authors on my podcast in the last year. I've bought personally every single one of their books, oftentimes before I even reach out to them, because I'm genuinely interested in their topic, and I'll thumb through it or I'll fully read it before I have the conversation with them. Again, so I do that research. I draft a conversation arc, which in my world is kind of where you're from, get us anchored into, who you are, some of the perspective that shaped where you're going. Let's talk about your area of subject matter expertise. Let's break out either into your insights or a fascinating story. Let's tie it all back together in some meaningful way, and then part our separate ways. So that's kind of how my arc goes. It doesn't mean that that's how all conversation arcs go, but that's just the way I approach it. Let's see. I don't know. The biggest thing that I can say is just don't over process, because that's what I did really early on, is I tried to make everything absolutely perfect. And it just doesn't make sense to do that with this medium. So again, I can't hammer that home enough. It's okay to make mistakes in this space. But shifting your mindset around that is probably the most difficult thing, especially if you're detail oriented or you expect a really high level of quality out of yourself, which is, I expect a high level of quality out of myself. So when I do an intro and I start bumbling around the intro, I get upset and I'm like, man, I really want to recut that intro before I publish, but I don't. I force myself to just kind of live with it. Like, hey, if you want to be good at this, you'll turn it on and you'll just knock it out of the park each time. And that's just going to be a continual reminder when you go back and listen about how much you've progressed and how much you still have to learn. And so what a great insight that's been for me. And then, again, record a few before you publish one, because it might not be what you thought. It might not be what you want. So I would say, and that's what I did. I recorded 3 or 4 of them before I even published the first one, just to make sure, do I still want to have these types of conversations? Is this interesting to me? Do I want to shift and go have a different type of conversation around a different subject? And for me, I just kind of stuck with journeys through life and interesting subcultures and those kinds of things. And then finally, and you all know this probably from training and development and building email lists and things like that, but breadcrumbing is so important. And I don't do it enough as I reflect, giving people a look in, hey, I'm talking to this person right now. A new podcast is coming out next week. I don't do that. I just kind of publish podcasts most of the time. And I don't create kind of excitement about certain guests. And I'm really trying to pivot and do that a little bit more based on advice that I was given. So again, where to find me? You can go jakeblanchard.com/podcast, specifically gets you to the podcast. You can find me anywhere that you download podcasts or consume content. So whether it be Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Stitcher, Podbean, RSS feed puts me in a lot of places. Find me on Instagram. I have a podcast dedicated page on Instagram. And then, follow, subscribe, right? That's smash that like button. I'll take any questions and happy to collaborate. And then again, you're more than welcome to reach out to me as well. You can find me on that jakeblanchard.com site, or I can leave my email. Would love to collaborate, or even some of you that might be wanting to start a podcast. I'm happy to just hop on and let's have a mock cast or be pod pals, or whatever you want to do. So any questions, thoughts, or concerns, I'll take them.
So we'll open it up. If you've got a question, feel free to just unmute your mic, or if you're not comfortable talking in the large group, toss it in the chat. We'll make sure it gets asked.
Hi there, this is Penny. I don't know if you can see me. I turned on my video too. So
I can, Penny.
Hi there. I know that being polite, you probably shouldn't ask this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I wanted to know if you make money doing your podcast, and how do you do it?
That's a great question. So I have 2 sponsors. The ones that I mentioned earlier, I have deals worked out with them on top line revenue that comes in based on the code that's being used. It is currently a good gig, but it does not quite yet pay for the podcast in and of itself. So I still have to run my management consulting firm, unfortunately, but because I'd love to do it full time. How cool would that be? But there's 2 or 3 different ways to get paid doing podcasts. A lot of celebrities or folks that have a name prior to podcasting can get paid by having guests on that want to get their brand promoted. So that's one. 2 is kind of the sponsorship route. And then 3 is if you're actually selling something on your podcast and you're using it as the thin edge of the wedge to establish credibility and kind of upsell services, specifically around what you're doing. I'm not really doing any of those besides the sponsorship. And again, every now and then I get that email that dings. It's like, oh, somebody bought, a bunch of sunscreen. I'm like, yes, but
you could probably maybe get a sponsorship from Yeti for the microphone. I have it too. I like it.
Yeah, it definitely takes some time. And the great thing about my perspective on it is I never expected to get paid on anything doing this podcast. It's going to be a labor of love for a number of years. And if opportunities present themselves, great. I was reached out recently by one of those firms that will pay you to have certain guests on. But I'm very particular about who I have on. I just don't want to be part of a book tour. I really want to be interested in what somebody has to say. So those values and not compromising, I think, is going to kind of bring some challenges. But we'll see.
Well, I appreciate you being honest.
Of course.
For myself, I'm sitting there going, oh my gosh, I'm going to start a podcast really quick. I want to do one for work. And then I want to do one for whatever it is. And then I'm going to make all this money because that's what they show on YouTube, that you can make zillions of dollars. And no. So thank you for, laying it out the way it is.
My podcast is, you look at it, it takes a couple $100 a month to run a podcast. My web series is insanely expensive to run and I get $0 out of it. And it's just like a pure labor of love. Like it definitely, my wife is like kind of tapping her foot, looking at me about the web series. She's like, hey, what are we doing here? Like you're spending close to $1,000 for like 200 views. I'm like, baby, it's not the views. It's not the views, babe. It's, but it is what it is.
Thank you.
Cool. I think we got time for one more quick question. Feel free to, again, throw it in the chat, or if you want to toss it or just unmute and throw it out there.
Sweet.
All right. Good enough. Jake, would it be possible to get a copy of this that I could, of your presentation that I could distribute out to the group?
100%.
Absolutely. Cool. All right. Well, I will plan on doing that. Once I have this recording uploaded to the ATD Central Iowa YouTube channel, I will email out everybody that was here today. I'll send a copy of Jake's presentation along with a link to that recording. But thank you very much, Jake. This is the first time, I think, in a long time that we ventured outside of our local community and had a national celebrity come in and
come on now.
present to us. So thank you so much for your time. Definitely appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming in this morning. Go Cyclones, big college football weekend this weekend. So make sure we cheer for the Cyclones as much as we can. And we'll see everybody back here October 1st for our Megan Torrance Agile Tech SIG conversation, and hope to see a lot of people at Professional Development Day here on the 17th. So thank you guys very much. Have a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks, Jake. Thank you.